Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dear viewers, we have been discussing the critique on the text of the narrative which records the collection of the Quran as attributed to the Caliph Uthman anhu and recorded in the Al-Jami al-Sahih of Imam Bukhari. Today we are going to discuss the critique which arises on the chain of narration of this narrative. In the previous 8 sessions, we have been discussing the critique on the text or the matan of the narrative, and which was brought to an end in the last session. And in this session, which is the 9th session of the series, we shall be discussing the critique, as I said, on the chain of narration or the isnad of this narrative. Now, it has various aspects which I'm going to delineate before you in this session. But first, let me start off with the fact that if you remember, earlier on in the very first session of this series, I had read out before you that there are certain narratives in some of the other books of Sihahs, in particular Tirmizi, the Sunan of Imam Tirmizi, in which a certain edition has been reported, and this edition is regarding the script of the word. So therefore, the first critique that we are going to discuss today does not relate actually to the narrative as recorded by Imam Bukhari, because he does not record this edition. However, this edition has been recorded by Imam Tirmizi and many of the other collectors and compilers of hadith, but which fall outside the category of the 6 canonical collections. But in the 6 canonical collections, we find Tirmizi recording this edition. So the words of this edition are, and this edition starts forth with the chain of narration, as I'm going to read it out before you. قال الزهري فاختلفوا يومئذ في التابوت والتابوه فقال الكرشيون التابوت وقال زيد بن ثابت التابوه فرفع اختلافهم إلى عثمان فقال اكتبوه التابوت فإنه نزل بلسان قريش. So translation of this would be, Ibn Shihab Zuhri said, on that day they differed between at-tabut and at-tabuh. The 3 Quraysh members of the committee opined that at-tabut is the correct script of the word, while Zayd said it was at-tabuh, ending with a ha. Their difference of opinion was referred to Uthman, who said, write at-tabut, which is at-tabut with a ta, because the Quran has been revealed in the language of the Quraysh. Now, this critique that I'm going to present before you is actually pointed out by Tamanna Imadi, and he has actually said that the gravest flaw on this edition is that Zuhri has not mentioned that from whom did he get this information, because the chain of narration abruptly starts off with Qala Zuhri فاختلفوا في التابوت. So how did Zuhri get this information? Who was his informant? And obviously his informant would himself needed to have been informed by someone else, because Zuhri was in the 2nd century. He died in the 2nd century. Or perhaps at least one person above him should have been there, if not 2. So therefore, his primary critique on this edition is that in the absence of the informant of Zuhri, we cannot be certain, and therefore this has no basis, because a person who just says that this edition was made and he's not contemporaneous, he does not exist to the events of this whole collection, this cannot be regarded as reliable at all. So this is the first critique that we can see. It arises on the text of the narration. However, as I said, that this text is found in Tirmizi. Now, it may also be noted that there are 2 narratives which attribute this edition to 2 persons, and which are, this edition is not recorded by Zuhri. We have 2 other persons also recording that this edition, besides Zuhri, we have 2 other persons that who say that this edition was made. So I'm also going to read out their narratives and then see if they hold any ground. And both of them have been recorded by Abdullah ibn Wahab in his Al-Jami. So the first of them has been recorded on the authority of Abu Salama ibn Abdul Rahman, and the words are وَفَقَالَ أبو سلمة أمر عثمان بن عفان فتيان من العرب أن يكتبوا القرآن ويمل عليهم زيد بن ثابت فلما بلغوا التابوت قال زيد اكتبوه التابوه. So Zayd said it should be written as التابوه with a ha. فقالوا لا تكتب إلا التابوت فذكروا ذلك لعثمان ذلك لعثمان فقال اكتبوا التابوت فإنما أنزله الله على رجل منا بلسان عربي مبين. Abu Salama ibn Abdul Rahman said, Uthman ibn Affan ordered some Arab youth to write down the Quran and Zayd ibn Sabit to dictate it to them. So when they reached At-Tabut, Zayd said, "Write it as At-Tabu with a ha." They said, "We will only write At-Tabut." They mentioned the matter to Uthman, who said, "Write it as Tabut, because for God has revealed the Quran in eloquent Arabic to us, to a person among us." So this is the first of the narratives which has been recorded by Abdullah ibn Wahab in his Al-Jami. Now the critique on this narrative is that according to Ibn Hajar, Abu Salama ibn Abdurrahman ibn Auf died in 94 Hijrah or 104 Hijrah and was born in early 20 Hijrah. Hence his narrative of the event are mursal. So therefore this first narrative also is unreliable. Now let us come to the second narrative, which has also been recorded, as I said, by Abdullah ibn Wahab in his Al-Jami, and this narrative is from Imam Malik. So the words are: وحدثنا مالك بن أنس اختلف الناس في القرآن فكان في كلام الأنصار التابوه وفي كلام قريش التابوت قال فأثبت في القرآن التابوت فأثبت في القرآن التابوت وكان عثمان بن عفان ممن أعان على ذلك. So Anas ibn Malik narrated to us, people differed in writing the Quran. In the language of the Ansar, it was written as a tabu with a ha. In the language of the Quraysh, it was a tabut. So it is said that فَأُثْبِتَ فِي الْقُرْآنِ at-tabut. It was written in the Quran as at-tabut with a ta. And Uthman helped them in this matter. So this, as I said, is also a narrative which has been recorded in Abdullah ibn Wahab's Al-Jami, and it is on the authority of Imam Malik. Now, it needs to be understood that it has been pointed out that or I would like to point out that this narrative too is munkata, because Imam Malik lived from 93 to 175 age. This is common knowledge. So hence he would not have been absolutely present in the times of this event, and hence anything which he says without informing us from whom he has got this addition obviously stands as broken, and it cannot be relied upon. So viewers, in this first critique on the chain of narration, we have basically criticized the addition which has been made in some narratives. As I said, in the Siha it occurs on the authority of Ibn Shihab Zuhri, and it has been recorded by Tirmidhi. And we have also seen that Abdullah ibn Wahab in Al-Jami recording this addition on the authority of either Imam Malik or Abu Salama. And when both of these, all three of these narratives are suspect. The first one because Imam Zuhri's addition has not been specified, and the second two as well on the pretext that both the people who are narrating this incident on a similar basis, they have not informed us of their own informants, and these two people are not contemporaneous with the addition made. Now, we move on to the next point of critique, and this critique has also been made by Tamanna Ahmadi, and he has said that the presence of Ibn Shihab Zuhri and Ibrahim ibn Sa'ad, his pupil, makes this narrative as suspect. Now, I'm afraid he has not referred to all the chains of narration in this regard, and he has also not referred to all the pupils of Ibn Shihab Zuhri who narrate this narrative. Now, as you can see on the screen, the complete chart which depicts this narrative, it shows that there are other students of Ibn Shihab Zuhri as well who depict this narrative. And this narrative, you can see, is not only communicated or disseminated from Ibn Shihab or reported from Ibn Shihab by Ibrahim ibn Sa'ad, but there are other narrators as well as students of Ibn Shihab who has narrated this, and they include Shu'aib ibn Abi Hamza, Yunus ibn Yazid, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, and Ibrahim ibn Ismail. So all of these 5 people report this chain of narration from Ibn Shihab Zuhri. But Tamanna has just referred to Ibrahim ibn Sa'ad. However, I'm not going to go into details of criticizing these chains, because whilst discussing the chain of narration or the isnad of the narrative in which the collection of the Quran ascribed to the Caliph Abu Bakr was being discussed, I had already pointed out that all these students of Ibn Shihab Zuhri have certain flaws in their chains of narration, and that critique which we had discussed in those talks in which the collection of the Quran regarding the attributed to Caliph Abu Bakr was being discussed, it is exactly the same here. Those chains of narration in the first couple of tiers is exactly the same, and Coming out of Ibn Shihab, we find that these five people who narrated from him have exactly the same flaws as I had pointed out while we were discussing the chains of narration of the Caliph Abu Bakr's collection. So therefore, this too stands to question. So in short, in this second critique, we can find that exactly the same chain of narration, if not very similar, we find the same pupils narrating this narrative from Ibn Shihab Zuhri, and hence it has exactly the same flaws which was pointed out earlier on when I was discussing the collection of the Quran narrative ascribed to the Caliph Abu Bakr. Now, viewers, we come to the third and final critique in this regard, and this is that we find that there are some narratives which say that a verse of Surah Ahzab was missing at the time of this collection. And these are independent narratives. We are going to discuss these independent narratives in which, as you would recall, that there was this narrative in which the Surah Ahzab verse was discussed as being missing. It was also found in the main narrative of Imam Bukhari. And then there were independent narratives which just had this addition. They were not part of that main narrative. So this third critique actually arises on those independent narratives which report the missing verse of Surah Ahzab. As far as the missing verse of Surah Ahzab is concerned, in which this whole section was a part of the main narrative, we have already made this critique not only on the text but in the previous point as well on the chain of narration. But this particular critique, this third critique, relates to the independent narratives which say that a missing verse of Surah Ahzab was found at this time when the Caliph Uthman was making these copies. Now, again, here we find Tamanna Imadi that he criticizes the chains of narration of these independent narratives. And I'm going to first just summarize and put before you the gist of his criticism, and then we will see what the actual situation is. So he actually quotes three variants of this narrative, and all of them are found in Al-Jami al-Sahih of Imam Bukhari. The first of them is in Kitab al-Fazail al-Quran, the second is in Kitab al-Jihad, and the third one is in Kitab al-Tafsir. So he has just discussed these three narratives. Now, in the first of these instances, it occurs in Al-Bukhari right after the Usmani collection. In other words, it is actually part of the main narrative. And so in this particular aspect, I'm going to just add to the fact that, as I said earlier on, that although the independent narratives are being discussed, but since Tamanna has, while discussing these independent narratives, has also taken up the main narrative, therefore I'm going to include just this one variant of in which he has made this or cited this narrative to be a part of the main narrative. And in this regard, he says that this first variant, which occurs in Al-Jami al-Sahih of Imam Bukhari and is part of the main narrative, it reads thus, right after the main narrative: قال ابن شهاب زوري وأخبرني خارجة بن زيد بن ثابت سمع زيد بن ثابت قال فقدت آية من الأحزاب حين نسخنا المصحف قد كنت أسمع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقرأ بها فالتمسناها فوجدناها مع خزيمة بن ثابت الأنصاري. And then the verse is: من المؤمنين رجال صدقوا ما عهد الله عليه فألحقناها في سورتها في الصحف في المصحف. And the words and the translation of this narrative is: Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri narrated from Kharija ibn Zayd, who narrated from Zayd ibn Thabit. I did not find a verse from Surah Ahzab when we made copies of the Quran, and I used to hear Allah's Prophet reciting it. So we searched for it and found it with Khuzaymah ibn Thabit. And the verse was, as I said, it's the same verse of Surah Ahzab: مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ رِجَالٌ صَدَقُوا مَا أَحَدُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ, which means among the believers are men who have been true in their covenant with God. And the narrative ends with the words فَأَلْحَقْنَاهَا فِي سُورَتِهَا فِي الْمُصْحَفِ. So we inserted it in its surah in the Mus'haf. It was inserted there. Now, the second of these, which Tamanna Imadi points out, is actually the independent narrative, and it reads thus, and it's also recorded by Imam Bukhari, as I said, and it is reported on the authority of once again by Zayd ibn Thabit, and the words are: قال لما نسخنا الصحف في المصاحف فقدت آية من سورة الأحزاب كنت أسمع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقرأها لم أجدها مع أحد إلا مع خزيمة al-Ansari. الذي جعل رسول الله شهادته الذي جعل رسول الله شهادته شهادة رجلين, and then the verse is cited as من المؤمنين رجال صدقوا ما عاهدوا الله عليه. Kharaja ibn Zayd reported from Zayd ibn Sabit, when we copied the Suhuf into Musaf, I found that the verse from Surah Ahzab was missing, which I used to hear from the Prophet recite. I did not find it with anyone except Khuzaymah ibn Sabit, whose witness was regarded by the Prophet to carry double the weight. And then the verse is cited as الْمُؤْمِنِينَ رِجَالٌ صَدَقُوا مَا عَاهَدُوا اللَّهَ عَلَيْهِ. Now, as far as a third of these three instances is concerned, again Tamanna cites it from Al-Bukhari, and its words are, I would just read part of the sanad or the isnad from the tahweel, which says, حدثنا إسماعيل قال حدثني أخي عن سليمان أراه عن محمد بن أبي عتيق عن ابن شهاب عن خارج بن زيد أن زيد بن ثابت رضي الله عنه قال نسخت الصحف في المصاحف فقدت آية من سورة الأحزاب كنت أسمع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقرأ بها فلم أجدها إلا مع خزيمة بن ثابت الذي جعل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم شهادته شهادة رجلين وهو قوله من المؤمنين رجال صدقوا ما عاهدوا الله عليه. Again, the same. It's almost the same. The translation is the same because the words are very similar, but I'm going to still read it out before you. So Kharaja ibn Zayd reported from Zayd ibn Sabit, when I copied the Suhuf into Mus'haf, I found that a verse from Surah Ahzab was missing, which I used to hear the Prophet reciting. I did not find it with anyone except Khuzaymah ibn Sabit, whose witness was regarded by the Prophet to carry double weight. And then the verse is cited as مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ رِجَالٌ صَدَقُوا مَا عَاهَدُوا اللَّهَ عَلَيْهِ. Now, these are the three instances which Tamanna Imadi cites as instances in which the missing verse of Surah Ahzab has been quoted. And as I said, the first of them is part of the main narrative, while the two other ones are independent narratives of Surah Ahzab verse and cited elsewhere in Al-Jami' Sahih of Imam Bukhari. Now, Imam Imadi analyzed the chain of narration of the last narrative, and the last one which I've just read out before you, and shows that the tahweel it bears is actually not trustworthy. And in order to understand his critique, consider the chain of narration of this narrative. And I have already read out the chain of narration before you. You can see it being displayed before you. Now, Imadi, while quoting Ibn Hajar, says that as per his explanation of the narrative, Ismail, who figures in this chain of narration, is actually Ismail ibn Abdullah ibn Uwais. And his brother is Abu Bakr, whose name is also there, and his name is Abu Bakr Abdul Hamid. And Suleiman is actually Suleiman ibn Bilal. And the words Urahu and Arahu and Muhammad ibn Abi Atiq, we find these words occur in the chain of narration. He says that these are the words of Ismail and not of Suleiman. And why does he say this? Because he says that though Suleiman met Ibn Shahab Zuhri, but according to the Muhaddisun themselves, he did not directly narrate from him. So in the opinion of Imadi, the real reason for this was that Suleiman actually belonged to the Mawali of the Quraysh and was stationed in Medina while Ibn Shahab Zuhri lived in Ela. The two could have met when Ibn Shahab Zuhri came to Medina before the time he had started narrating. Suleiman died in 172 Hijrah or 177, which means that Suleiman could have seen Ibn Shahab Zuhri in his childhood. In other words, this could have been a possibility, but he never heard from him, never narrated from him. Now, he goes on to say that Ismail's full name is Ismail ibn Abdullah ibn Awais, and he is one of the shuyukh of Imam Bukhari as well, who obviously regards him to be trustworthy. Now, Ibn Hajar, on the contrary, records in his Tehzeeb al-Tehzeeb that according to Ma'awiyah ibn Salih, he and his teacher are Zaif. An-Nisai has also called him Zaif, and at another place he has called him Ghayru Sika, that he's not trustworthy. Now, Yahya ibn Ma'in says that he and his father would steal a hadith. They would steal hadith. Ad-Dulabi has recorded in his Az-Zu'afa that he heard Nasr ibn Salama say that Ibn Abi Awais is a great liar, and the word used is Kazzab. He's a great liar. So in other words, according to Tamanna Imadi, there is only one chain of narration which is worthy of consideration and which is quoted in those three which I just read out before you. And this chain of narration, as you can see, is being displayed before you, in which we find that it is Imam Bukhari's Sheikh is actually Abul Yaman al-Hakam ibn Nafi, who reports from Shoaib ibn Abi Hamza, who reports from Ibn Shahab, and then Kharija, and then Zayd. This is the chain of narration which he finds as only worthy of consideration. And this I say because in the first narrative, in which Ibn Shahab Zuhri actually narrates directly, he says that in the light of this narrative we can say that actually Ibn Shahab Zuhri is actually relating this narrative from Abul Yaman Hakam ibn Nafi, who himself narrates from Shoaib ibn Abi Hamza. So therefore he says that in the light of this third narrative, the first narrative also should be seen in this light. And in this we can easily see if Ibn Shahab has not reported his shuyukh, then in the light of this third narrative, the Sheikh of Imam Bukhari is Abul Yaman Hakam ibn Nafi, and Abul Yaman's Sheikh or teacher is Shoaib ibn Abi Hamza, and Shoaib himself obviously reports from Az-Zuhri. Now, if this is correct, then he says that these two chains of narration, the first and third, also stand to question, because we know that Abul Yaman Hakam ibn Nafi has not heard from Shoaib except a very few narratives, or a couple of narratives, which we have already cited and discussed in our collection of the Quran critique while we were discussing this in the case of the Caliph Abu Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Now, he says it may be noted that Imadi's criticism on the chain is regarding narratives which are quoted in Al-Bukhari only. And as I said, this Imadi, when we are at the moment analyzing the critique on this vis-a-vis this third point by Tamanna Imadi. Now, as you will recall, I had cited those three narratives as per which, according to Tamanna, the missing verse of Surah Azab was found. And we have seen his critique is weighty as far as these narratives are concerned. But the problem is, and the point is, that Imadi again has not made a comprehensive research in this matter, because we find that there are other books as well in which this narrative is found besides Bukhari, and they need a critique as well. And if you can see the chart which is being displayed before you, you can see that there are a number of other people as well who actually report this addition. And if all these narratives are analyzed, it comes to light that it is only Ibrahim ibn Sa'd's narrative which specify that Kharija had actually heard the addition from his father. Now, this is a point that I am making myself, and which needs your attention, viewers. You can see that in all these narratives, you can see that the narratives of Muawiyah ibn Yahya, Muhammad ibn Abi Atiq, Hisham ibn al-Ghaz, Mamur ibn Rashid, and Shoaib ibn Abi Hamza not only do not specify of him, of Kharija hearing from his father. One of the narratives from Mamur ibn Rashid, as recorded in the Musnad of Ahmed ibn Hanbal, even says that he is not even certain whether Ibn Shahab Zuhri heard it from Kharija. So in other words, this makes the whole issue even more dubious. So in other words, there is a narrative which says that Ibn Shahab Zuhri, it's not even certain whether Ibn Shahab Zuhri heard this narrative from Kharija ibn Zayd himself. And the words in this regard are, this narrative, as I said, is quoted by Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal. The words are, Anna Mamar an Zuhri an Kharija ibn Zayd aw ghayrihi Anna Zayd ibn Sabit, which means that Zuhri is not even certain whether he heard it from Kharija or someone else. So this is a further critique on this narrative. As far as the chains of narration that you have seen regarding these Surah Azab narratives, which I have said are more comprehensive than what actually Tamanna has stated, once again you can see the chains of narration before you. If you can recall that we have already discussed the leftmost and the rightmost chains of narration whilst we were discussing the narrative of the collection of the Quran attributed to the Caliph Abu Bakr. You can see in the chart that the leftmost and the rightmost narrations are the ones which we have already discussed. So let me now see what the remaining chains of narration are like and how they stand to the test of criticism. And viewers, this is above and over the fact that we have already discussed earlier on that Kharija ibn Zayd was at a very tender age of 15 or 16 years when his father died, or when he had heard from his father. So coming back to the point that I was making, that the chains of narration, the leftmost and the rightmost chains of narration, have already been discussed. And as far as the remaining ones are concerned, let me start off by critiquing taking from the chain of narration which is falls on the right. After the rightmost, the next and right is being displayed before you, and here you can see that the person that I am now going to critique is Abdullah ibn Uzayna. Now, Abdullah ibn Uzayna, as recorded by Ibn Hajar in his Lisan al-Mizan, now he says that according to Al-Hakim and Al-Naqash, he would narrate fabricated narratives, and according to Ad-Darqutni, he is Matrukul Hadith. So Abdullah ibn Uzayna is Matrukul Hadith, and it's this chain of narration, you can see, as a result, stands to question. And according to Ibn Habban, he is Munkarul Hadith. So both these terms of critique can be seen are on the personality of Abdullah ibn Uzayna. Now, viewers, as far as Abdullah ibn Uzayna is concerned, you have seen the critique which is being made by our authorities. Now, in this particular chain of narration, the same chain of narration, there is another person who is Ahmed ibn Yahya ibn Zukair. Now, we are now going to critique him and see how Muhaddisun have seen his personality. Now, according to Darqutni, he is Laysa bi Shay'in Hadith. This is what Darqutni says, and this has been recorded by Ibn Hajar in his Lisan al-Mizan. So, this shows that this chain of narration, in the presence of these two narrators, Abdullah ibn Uzayna and Ahmad ibn Yahya ibn Zukair, they stands to question. Now, viewers, we come to the next chain of narration, and this chain of narration, part of it has already been criticized by Tamanna Ahmadi, but this is the one in which Ismail ibn Abi Awais configures, and now his full name is Ismail ibn Abdullah ibn Awais, and he is one of the shuyukh of Al-Bukhari, who obviously regards him to be trustworthy. Now, Ibn Hajar, on the other hand, as recorded in his Tahzib al-Tahzib, he says that according to Muawiyah ibn Saleh, he and his father are Zaif. An-Nisai has also called him Zaif. And at another place, he has called him Ghayru Sikah, that he is untrustworthy. Yahya ibn Ma'in says that he and his father would steal hadith. And Ad-Dulabi has recorded that he has recorded his name in Al-Zurafa, that he is among weak narrators. And he heard Nasr ibn Salama say that Ibn Abi Awais is a great liar. He's a kazzab. So, and we now come to the next chain of narration in this regard. And in this we find a person by the name of Muawiyah ibn Yahya. So, viewers, this is the second from the left chain of narration in which we find the person. I'm leaving out one of the chains of narration, which is Ma'mun ibn Rashid, because that is the only perhaps chain of narration which has no flaws. So the other one after that is which is the chain of narration in which we find Muawiyah ibn Yahya as-Sadafi. Now, as far as Muawiyah ibn Yahya is concerned, according to Ibn Hajar in his Taqrib al-Tahzib, he is Za'if. And according to Nisai, he is Matruk al-Hadith Jiddan. And he is a person who has forsaken to the ultimate degree. Al-Mizzi records, Yahya ibn Ma'in says, Halikun laysa bishay. Al-Juzjani says, Zahib al-Hadith. Abu Zura calls him Laysa bil-Qavi. Abu Hatim calls him Za'if al-Hadith. And Abu Dawood and Darqutni call him Za'if. So this is the criticism on Muawiyah ibn Yahya, and you can find this in Ibn Hajar's Taqrib al-Tahzib and in An-Nasai's Al-Zu'afa. So this, viewers, brings us to the end of this discussion regarding the chain of narration of the Surah Ahzab narratives. And you can see that the only narrative which can be regarded as free of flaws is that of Ma'mar ibn Rashid, in which he narrates from Ibn Shihab Zuhri. However, as I said, that a comprehensive critique on this and the rest of the narratives is that Kharija's age while he was narrating is suspect, and so therefore when he was narrating from his father, Zayd ibn Sabit, he was at a very tender age of 15 or 16, and this is the only line of narration which can be regarded as trustworthy vis-a-vis the narrative. And as I said, this one is the one in which Ma'mar reports from his teacher Ibn Shihab Zuhri. So, viewers, in this session or in this episode, we have discussed the chains of narration or the isnad of the narrative in various degrees. We have discussed the surah, we have discussed an addition in which we find that the script of a word a taboot or a taboo was in debate, and we find that those narratives have weak chain of narration. We have also discussed the main narrative, and we have seen that the chains of narration of the main narrative are all of them are the same, are a subset of the chains of narration of the narrative of the collection of the Quran in the times of Abu Bakr, and all the critique which was actually done at that time applies to these chains of narration as well. And finally, we have also seen the Surah Azab narratives, which are found in Bukhari by Tamanna Mahdi, and I've elaborated on that his critique is incomplete. And if we can take on the whole scenario and you take all the narratives in, we make a comprehensive view of all the narratives, we find that these two are lacking, and they have flaws, as far as the fact that a verse was found of Surah Azab at this time, and we have seen that all these narratives they have their flaws, and the gravest flaw is Kharija reporting from his father is something of a suspect nature. But then again, other than that, we find that there are other flaws as well. So all in all, we see that the chains of narration of all these narratives under consideration is not sound, and it has the flaws that I have just delineated before you. Now, in the next session, inshallah, we'll summarize this whole critique on the collection of the Quran narrative as ascribed to the Caliph Uthman radiallahu anhu, and see that if all these critiques, not only on the isnad, not only on the matan or the text of the narrative, but on its chain of narration as well, is correct, then what exactly happened in the times of the Caliph Uthman? What exact is the summary of this critique, and what exactly happened in the Caliph Uthman's times? So that is going to be the topic in the last last lecture or last talk of this series. Until that time, أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمات.